Hey, welcome back to another episode of A Warrior Spirit, where we let the inner warrior shine in their light. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Carlyn Montes De Oca. She's an author and a advocate for animals, and just a genuine soul who has a very interesting story, and one I'm anxious to talk about. So, Carlyn, thank you for joining me today, and I appreciate you coming on.
It's my pleasure. I so appreciate the topics you bring up and the focus of your podcast. So it's a real honor.
Well, I started reading your book, Junkyard Girl, and I have to tell you, the first, even just the prologue, really transports a person into your story. Seeing you laying on the doghouse, watching the clouds go by, and all the thoughts going on in your head. One of the things that you said in there that was really interesting, because it pertains to the rest of the story that we're going to get into for you, is how even as a young girl in your family, you didn't feel like you were actually someone who belonged in that family. Like somehow you were always different or not quite familiar, from that standpoint of the family you grew up with. So as I know the rest of your story, it was kind of interesting to me that even as a young girl, you had a sense of something slightly off, right?
Yeah, that's very true. And I thought to myself, well, I'm just different. There just must be some in every family, there's always somebody who's different. So I'm way shorter than everybody else. My father is had light skin and green eyes, and two of my siblings look so much like him. And I thought, well, I'm just different. And, as I got a little bit older, I mean, I thought differently. I just thought about the world from the get-go in a very different way. So I always felt just a little bit odd, just a little bit out there. Like for me, my friends were my dogs. I grew up with dogs. I had dogs. I wanted to spend all my time with dogs and reading. And and my siblings were a lot older than me. Actually, my sister, who's next to me in age, was 9 years older.
Hmm.
And so, yes, and the way I describe it in a prologue, and as you say, we will get into the story, I say it's this unexplainable knowing, this thing that was just in the back of my mind for a long time. And sometimes I think I actually knew I didn't belong in this family. But at the time, you're little. And so you just kind of look at the clouds and wish and think, God, I wish my real parents would come for me one day. I wish I lived with my real family.
Yeah, and what's interesting about your journey is that it wasn't until your late 50s that you discovered that what you thought as a child was actually true. And from even chapter one, you didn't even have a real desire to find your family through your ancestry. You were just kind of hoping to confirm pieces of it. Is that correct?
Right. Right. The reason I was looking ever since that was another thing that was different about me. Here I am, the one that actually doesn't fit in, but I'm the one who wants to know about the Montes de Ocas, which was my father's side of the family, and the Curiels, which is my mother's side of the family. I went to study in school in Madrid for a year, and I researched the name. I traveled to Montes de Oca, and I learned about our family, and I was the one who brought all this information back. So even when I did ancestry DNA, I thought, oh, that'll be fun. I'll figure out how much Spanish I am, and maybe I'm a little Portuguese, or maybe I'm something else that's really cool, and then I can share it with my siblings, and we can know all that. But the funny thing is, I heard you say in a podcast that you're a perfectionist. I kind
Mm.
of am a recovering one as well. So I usually tend to be very busy. I have a lot of things going on. And at the time, I was super busy. So I got the DNA results from my test that I took. And I looked at it very quickly. And I saw, oh, you're this much Spanish, this much Portuguese, this much, they call it, I forget what they call it, but it's Native American to the Americas,
Yeah,
this much. And
indigenous.
I thought, yeah, well, I don't know, whatever. And I just set it aside. But if I had looked a little more carefully, I would have seen some information that would have said, yeah, but you're not exactly related to everybody else in your family.
Well, what's even before that, you ordered the test reluctantly, and then you
Mhm.
set it aside and didn't even do it. It
Mhm.
was your stepdaughter, as
Right.
you say in the book, who kind of chastised you for it still sitting there for several months. And I wonder, like you knew as a child you didn't belong, and as you grew up, in your teen and adult years, whatever was transpiring then, I'm wondering if you didn't take the test right away and didn't read the results right away because you still, part of you knew the truth and didn't maybe want to dive into it.
You know what? I'm not sure that that's the case because I'm such a truth seeker.
Okay.
It's as if you're going to open Pandora's box, I'm going to want to know what's in there,
Okay.
even if it's bad. I
Okay.
need to know. And so, and I don't know, somehow that maybe it's a control thing of just needing to know so I can survive. It's probably a primal brain thing or something. But I pretty much left it aside because I really did have tons of other things going on. For
Yeah.
example, and I don't know if you're that far into the book, but what was going on too is I was actually writing another book that I was supposed to, when you launch a book, you have certain dates you have to fulfill. And so I had that going on. And I had two dogs at the time who
You just passed.
one literally passed away. And then 4 weeks later, the other one passed away. So they were both really sick, they're old. And I was really, I mean, being such an animal lover, and these were, members of our family and animals that I really loved and had such a strong relationship with, and one passing and then the other one passing right on. So I had that going on in my head at the time. And I think that that's maybe, my life was just so busy that I just kind of left it there. And then that's when Gina came home and she's like, why is that still there? Go in there, spit in the tube and send it off.
So you're currently living in Santa Fe. Did you grow up in Santa Fe?
No, I grew up in California. I
Okay.
grew up in Southern California. I don't know if you're familiar with a small beach town called Carpinteria.
No.
Carpinteria is right next to Santa Barbara, which most
Okay.
people know.
Yeah.
Carpinteria was made famous by the Beach Boys because there's an area called Rincon Point where they sing about surfing on Rincon Point. So, and Carpinteria is also known for the world's safest beach.
Oh, nice. So kind of a small
Mhm.
area. What was
Mhm.
life like growing up? I mean, your siblings are already, you said 6 years, 9 years,
9 years older, and then
nine. Yeah.
14 and 14 years older.
Yeah. So it's almost like being an only child.
Yes, yes.
So
So
small
what was,
town. Yeah. What
yep.
was that like?
Well, that is that is a big part of Junkyard Girl, and which is why it's called Junkyard Girl. And from the prologue, you'll know why pretty much from the get-go. Is that part of the reason that, okay, well, Carpinteria now is probably one of the most expensive places you could live. It's crazy. But at the time, it was more of a poor cousin to Santa Barbara.
All
So
right.
there was a working class. Everything was orchards of avocados and lemon groves. And it was next to the beach. And so it was this very small little town. Uh, what was different for me growing up was that my parents were immigrants from Mexico, and they came to this country to, have a better life for the family they hoped to have. And the thing is, my father was, he had a lot of family left behind in Mexico, and he was kind of the provider for so many of them, mostly because his own father had died and he had to leave school at age 12 to provide for six brothers and sisters and his mother and such. So they came here and they worked really hard. My parents were really hard workers. I think I inherit that from them. But they became hoarders. And it started off as kind of a thing that they were collecting things for other people that had less than they did.
Mm-hmm.
But then it just got out of control. And so there was stuff everywhere on the inside of our house. I mean, we had, I think, about an acre of land, and, that was not like lemon groves and orchards. It was just stuff. It was just stuff everywhere outside. And that was part of why you read the prologue, I'm sitting there on a doghouse with my dog and looking up at the sky going, when are my real parents going to come for me? This cannot be my life. This cannot be it. And that's something I struggled with a lot, being kind of a junkyard girl.
Hmm. So, and I can relate to some of that because my wife is Portuguese of immigrants who came to the United States when she was younger, and I see that hardworking immigrant mentality, but I also see that, when they came from less, it's important to now protect when they have more because they don't have the realization that more is still here. You know,
Mhm.
they think it's always going to be less.
Yes, and I think my sister put it this way. She said, my parents, the number one thing to them was their family.
Hmm.
And if anything should happen, because they had been through so much in their life, they had been through wars, through poverty, through so much that they thought, okay, well, we'll have five of everything because one day, if anything should happen, we will survive. And it wasn't like five of nice things, it was five of junky things because my father could fix anything and make
Right.
anything into anything. So it just kind of got really out of control. And for me, growing up in that, at first, when I was a little kid, I saw it as really cool things. Look, here's a shield. Look, here's a sword. And I'd go out there with my dogs and we'd pretend and play act and do all these things. But then I became a little bit older and I started to see or recognize how people were looking at us, me, the
Hmm.
yard. And that's when I really started realizing, whoa, we're really different. And a lot of shame, a lot of just, I think a lot of insecurity came from that, a lot of conflict within myself, a lot of anger eventually.
Which, is kind of normal because and I grew up very poor as well. I mean, I'd come home from school and there'd be an eviction notice or a condemnation notice on our front door, and next thing you know, we're packing up to go to the next, location. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't realize that you're poor. You're making the best of what you can. And, as you start growing older and have the awareness, that's when the things you're talking about seem to settle in. So how old were you when you left that, and how did you overcome that angst you were starting to feel about, where you were growing up?
It took me a long time to let that go. I mean, I lived at home until I was 18. And those years from me sitting on the doghouse looking up and 18 were really fraught years with, I loved my parents and I know they loved me and I adored my siblings and I know they did the same for me. But my mother and I just had just a very difficult relationship between us. And I think that stemmed from my mother had been through so much and the way she was taught, every generation is taught from the one before. She
Mhm.
was taught the way that we will be safe is control. She will tell us what to do. The other thing
Mhm.
too is, I mean, we haven't talked about what the big secret is, which I guess can I share now what that
Yeah,
is?
sure,
Because
absolutely.
it's probably it's helpful to know is that when I took that DNA test, there was a woman's name that if I had had the time or the wherewithal, I would have thought, hey, who is that? And in the fine print said this could potentially be a half sister. And her husband that woman's husband reached out to me. And I'll say this, I know it's a little bit divergent, but it's kind of funny. The husband sent me a Facebook message and he said, you look an awful lot like my wife. And I was like, God, what a flirt. Who is this person? And then I ignored him, but he kept sending me, and then he sent me photos. And he's like, don't you think you look like her? And I looked at the picture and I said to my husband, do I look like this lady? He's like, no. And then I wrote to the husband, I said, I think your wife and I shop for glasses at the same store. Otherwise, I don't see a resemblance. And he says, well, ancestry DNA says different. It ends up his wife was the woman on that sheet that I had that said potential half sibling, which I still hadn't read the fine print. And she did reach out to me. We connected. She was telling me who she was and she was looking for family. She didn't want to bother me. And I looked at it and I said, well, I don't know any of these people, but I'll ask my siblings. You know, my parents have passed. Maybe they'll know who she's related to. And my siblings were so tight-lipped. They did not, I was like, something's weird. They're not, we're usually laughing and very light with each other, and they were just serious. Then my sister flew out to Santa Fe one very stormy, windy, snowy day. And from California, she flew out and she said, Carlene, there's something big that's happened in our family, and I have to talk to you about it. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? What happened? And she had to pull out pages and start reading them because she couldn't. She was crying so much. And she basically said, Carlene, you were adopted at birth. And then she went on to tell the story and why it was kept secret. And so back to your question of my mother and I, if you think about it, this woman was keeping this big secret. And part of the
Mm-hmm.
big secret was she had told my siblings, this, and this is your new sister. If people find out she's adopted, they will try to hurt her because where they came from in Mexico, being adopted or being a bastard or, whatever terminology you wanted to use, people treated you really poorly. And it wasn't so nice here either, because in the 60s, I know people who were just disowned by their family when
Mm-hmm.
that was discovered. So my mother and father and family wanted to protect me, but protection, that turned into overprotection because
Mm-hmm.
everybody was trying to protect me from the truth. And the thing is, I have 63 first cousins and they all knew.
Wow.
A massive family and everybody knew. So that was kind of at the, below the surface of my mother and I just battling it out. And part of it was she wanted, I wanted to be the all-American girl. I lived in America and I watched the Partridge Family and all of that. And she wanted me to be more Mexican and to, speak Spanish all the time at home and, the kind of things you rebel against. And she was so overprotective and that's how I'm different from the rest. My sister was much more obliging. She did everything my parents said, my mother said, and I was the rebel. I fought everything she said. So until I was, and then when I hit 18 and I was off to college, I'm like, oh, I was free. I was free, but I wasn't free from all that had happened. You carry that with you. And unless you deal with it directly, you're going to carry it. And I carried it and made a lot of mistakes. I did a lot of things. And to be totally honest, I believe that when I wrote that book, Junkyard Girl, that is the thing that changed everything for me because I had a chance to put everything down on the page as honestly and authentically as I could.
So, and it's a shame that it took 30 more years to get to that point. And I'm speaking that from my own journey of, having to release my childhood stuff. I'm
Mhm.
There's a part of me glad that yes, I've done it now, but there's also a part of me that had to wait 59 years to get there. Like I look back and I'm like, man, that was a lot of wasted life being angry about stuff that I could have let go had I only known the truth. If I'd
Right.
have known the truth, then I could have dealt with my life differently. And I don't know if that was a similar experience that you had when the truth finally came out or not, but
I
you
feel
didn't
that
have parents to go back and talk to about it.
you're right. And what you're saying, it's an interesting thing because I've wrestled with that a little bit because I fully believe everybody should have the right to the truth about their own life.
Hmm.
And yes, now it's different. I know that people who are who help in the adoption process and whatnot, really professionals will encourage that children be told early. I think they encourage open adoption. Back then, that wasn't the case.
Nope.
And so I think to myself, yeah, I had every right to know as early as possible, but I really have gone through the years thinking about, well, maybe it wouldn't have been a good idea to be told right away because my mother in particular was not really warm and fuzzy. She would have been like, Daryl, you're adopted and let's never
Hmm.
talk about it again. And so
Right.
that would have been like, whoa. And then when I hit my 20s, I was so like out of here, I'm gone. I probably, and they were afraid I was going to figure it out and I would go look for my birth mother. So, and I was very angry and not in a place really to, God, get that information. Then I think about my 30s and I was married and not in a good marriage, and that wouldn't have been a good time to know. And then I think about my 40s when I then married my husband, Ken, who we've been married 22 years, just hit that milestone. But he had two children and we had a very full life and we were working all the time and so busy, not a great time. When my 50s hit and I was really feeling my strongest, I had become an author, which is what I'd wanted to do my whole life. I was really advocating for animals. In fact, I had just come back from the Roundhouse, which is the legislative building here in Santa Fe, after talking to senators about, I don't even remember what it was. And I was coming back to meet my sister who had just flown in from California. And I was thinking, God, I feel strong. I'm at my strongest. I'm at my best. And then my sister says, Carlene, you're adopted. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa. So in some ways, in my 50s, I was the best prepared, even though I feel I should have been told at 5.
Well, we do. I believe we're evolving and we learn the things we need to know when we're at the age we need to know them. And hindsight is always 2020 of, oh, I wish I'd have known it different. But it's the past that makes our present, that gives us the strength to be our future. And so divine timing, I think, is key. But it's still, I mean, even though you in the back of your head knew that you were different, in the back of the head you knew that something was not there, it's still, you just did it. You're like, oh, whoa, it's still a shock. Um, what was the purpose of the adoption other than, adopting a child? Because a 9-year gap between siblings isn't usually when people say, oh, let's bring another one into the family. And
Right.
kudos to your family, kudos in quotes, to your family for being that large and that quiet at the same time, because family isn't usually quiet about a lot of the secrets in the family when things get, a little rough. So, the fact that they were able to all be quiet about it, what was the purpose of the adoption? Because there had to be something that kept them all quiet.
Well, that is the interest, probably one of the most interesting things about all of this is that my mother had gone to visit. So this is Santa Barbara, Carpentry area, had gone to visit a friend. And as she was knocking on her door, she could hear, because the friend lived near a creek with trees and whatnot, she could hear a lady crying back there. And when her friend came to the door, she's like, hey, do you know this woman back here? She's crying. She goes, yep, that's my cousin. She's here from Chicago. She's not married. She's got 2 kids already. She's got a third one on the way. And she wants me to help her get an abortion. And I'm not going to help her. I don't care how much she cries. And so literally my mother went home and spoke with my father. She came back the next day and said to this complete stranger, we will take your child, we'll raise your child, we'll adopt your child, and you can come live with us until she's born. My parents were, as I said, were immigrants from Mexico. They did not have a lot of means. They already had 3 children who were older. And they took this family of strangers, these 2 little kids and their mother, to live with them for 6 months until I was born. And then 2 months later, they let her stay there. And then they gave her a little bit of money to get on the Greyhound and go back to Chicago. So,
Wow.
yeah. And so when I heard that, especially because my mother and I had had I mean, we loved each other. We knew that, but we were just, at it with each other because we wanted what we wanted. But when I heard that, and there's a lot more to come, and I had always been dreaming, like, when's my real family coming? When are my real parents? I suddenly went, oh my God. And especially when I learned who my birth mother was and the life she'd given the 2 kids she had had, I went, my mother saved my life. My adopted mother saved my life. And if I had gone to live in Chicago, oh my God, my life would have been so different. And here I was dreaming of the perfect family when the perfect family I always had was this imperfect family in front of me. So,
That's an awesome discovery, because a discovery like that shows your self-worth and your self-purpose instantaneously. My
mhm.
life meant something to somebody enough to take me in and give me the life I had. The only unfortunate part is you didn't get a chance to say that directly to your, mom. So, but she
You're
knows.
right. You're right. And I know we spoke a little bit previously before we were recording about one of the final chapters in my book and the Portuguese
Hmm.
relationship to that. That's exactly where I cover it because you're right. The one, I don't like to have regrets. I don't like to live a life with regrets, but I really wish I could have talk to my parents. I don't know, maybe the book would have turned out completely different, or my experience of all of this would have been different. But I just would have liked to have had 5 minutes to talk to each of my parents about this. And instead, I imagine what that could be, or I'll see them some other time in the future.
Was Junkyard Dog born out of this discovery, or had you started it and changed it after the discovery?
It's funny, it was going to be called Junkyard Dog, and then we changed it to Junkyard Girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, Junkyard Girl. I had started to think, what's my next book after I had finished, my last one, and I thought, well, I think this whole experience of growing up the way I did, it's so, there's a lot there. Maybe I'll just write that. So right now, Junkyard Girl is two stories interwound. It's this massive discovery, then me having to go into the past, and because you have to go through every memory and suddenly go, wait, this is what that meant. This is what this was. You almost have to redo the past step by step. So let's see. So the story was going to be the one thing, and then this happened, and then suddenly it was at the exact right time. But the deal was there was no way I could write this story because it was so traumatic when it happened that I was like, I have nothing wise to say about it right now. I'm just trying to get through the trauma of having my life upended in this way. Because the truth was, when my sister said those words, "You're adopted," I literally felt like I stopped being able to hear her. I remember like staring at her lips because my ears felt like they were full of cotton.
Hmm.
And just having to watch her lips say the rest of the words, it was like, I think that's what shock can do to you. It does
Hmm.
something to your physical body. And then after that, the next couple of weeks were insane. I'm not I don't cry a lot. Obviously something huge happens, but I don't cry a lot. God, I was crying every 5 minutes. I would tie my shoes and start crying. I'd wash the dishes and start crying. And I thought, God, what's wrong with me? I'm just crying and I'm so emotional. And if you think about it, so many emotions were going through me, you know, uh, uh, gosh, shock and grief and disappointment. Like, I've not been told my story for 59 years or 7 years or however old I was at the time. Some anger, some this, some that. It was just so much. It was like this Molotov cocktail of emotions just brewing, and I knew I was going to have to deal with that before I could actually write anything. So it took about a year before I sat down to write that book.
Wow. That's a long journey in between. What was the catalyst that propelled you forward from what you just described?
The catalyst would have been, as you remember how you said, sometimes we need to learn the things we do at the time and regardless of how old we are.
Hmm.
Well, I realized I was in such an emotional, like, tumultuous place that was so uncomfortable. And I thought to myself, how do I move through this? How do I move through this? Do I just let it happen? And then I thought of all the other things that had happened in my life up to this point that were difficult, challenging: divorce, death, people you love, just not being here anymore. And I thought, well, okay, what did I do in those situations? Or what could I do now to do that better? And I realized I need to look at these emotions of grief and loss and shock and talk to them. Talk to these emotions. Be with these emotions and not look at them as the enemy that I have to put away or ask to leave.
Hmm.
So anytime I felt anything, I'm sorry, you asked the catalyst. And the reason was I really felt strongly, if I can deal with these emotions in a very conscious way, in the way that I'm describing, where it's a conversation and I can feel what it is and then ask it to leave when I'm done and see how I can grow from that. I knew that at the other end, if I could swim to that other end in this way, there was going to be some treasure there. There was going to be something really good. And I had this really belief in that I would somehow change or transform or something. There would be a gift on the other side. So, okay, here comes shock. And it's like, okay, I'm feeling shock. I'm feeling that wave of things and just breathing through it, being with it, crying if I had to, or just being silent or going to sleep or whatever it was. And then having a little conversation as if it's a guest in your house and saying, okay, I feel you. I feel you. And you're probably trying to help me in some way. What can I learn from this? And you wouldn't always get the answer, but even in the conversation, in those moments of being quiet with it, it would shift and it would go away. And okay, here comes loss, and you do the same thing. So I did that as conscientiously as I could, while also going through the journey of trying to figure out the truth, because as I said, I'm somebody, you open Pandora's box, I want to know the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went on a journey to find out the truth, why everybody kept it quiet. I learned my birth mother was alive and on hospice, and she only had a few months to live. So I was, I explored everything. I found the woman who was, who ended up being my half sister on Ancestry DNA. So there was two things going on simultaneously, me dealing with my internal journey and then my external journey as well.
You sound very much like me and my wife, because and you listened to my story a little bit, but when my Pandora box opened up, it was that same rush of emotion to, okay, I need to know the truth, regardless of what it was and regardless of where it led, so that I can fully heal, because I can't heal with just partial information. And one of the things I love about doing this show is I get to meet people like you who have that same spirit, who have that same determination, who have that same dogmatic need for the truth, because the truth is easier to deal with than any lie that we've ever dealt with.
Yeah, it's true. You know that phrase, the truth will set you free.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I really believe that. And I really learned that in this situation.
Well, I can tell you from someone who's intuitive and in touch with, the godly energy and the spirit, it shines through you very powerfully. And I admire what I'm talking with and who I'm talking with right now, because that strength emanates huge. Which leads me to the strength of not only self-preservation, but you're a very big advocate for animals. And you've written several books that are centered around animals. What were those books about?
Well, my first book was called Dog as My Doctor, Cat as My
Hmm.
Nurse.
Okay.
And at the time, I've had three careers. My first career was 20 years. I worked in the film industry. I worked in film editing.
Okay.
And when I burned out on that, I went to school and I got my master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine and became an acupuncturist and had my own clinic and whatnot. And during that period of time when I was an acupuncturist, I'd sit with people and we'd sit and we'd engage just like we are now before I would ever do a treatment. And I was always amazed that here I was, and acupuncture, I think, is a very powerful modality that treats
Mhm.
mind, body, spirit. It does the whole thing, and you don't even know what's happening. It's just working. But anyway, I'd sit and talk with my clients, and I would be amazed when we got onto the topic of dogs or cats or horses or whatever their companion animals were. And suddenly somebody would start laughing or crying, or they'd smile for the first time. And as a practitioner, I'd be thinking, I was always thinking what's going on inside the body. Wow, you're here for, stress and you're laughing now. And all you're doing is telling me a story. Your dog isn't even here. Or here's this person, he's got cancer. And he's like, oh my God, my dog hasn't left my side, or my cat hasn't left my side, this 6 months I've been in, bed or whatever it was. And there'd be the people coming in talking about the emotional aspects of, just broke up with someone and I was devastated. And my dog came into the kitchen and was licking me and sat on my lap. And I felt better. And I was like, who cares about that other guy? And, whatever it was. And I thought to myself, look at what's going on. Also, I knew there were positive hormones going through these people's bodies that were maybe offsetting that cortisol, which is a stress hormone, knowing that blood pressure is going down. And I thought, wow, what a powerful modality to have a strong connection, to have a strong animal-human bond with, somebody who's not even of your species. How beneficial is that? And funny enough, at the same time, I started reading, all this stuff started coming out about how science was actually showing that it's really beneficial to have a companion animal and to develop a bond. It's not really helpful if you just leave your dog in the yard and don't pay attention, and that's kind of mean anyway, but you want them to be part of your family. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. And I thought, well, I look at health I don't look at it just physical health. I look at the whole body and the whole being. And I think that's what animals help with, every aspect: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And so that's how dog as my doctor, cat as my nurse came about. I also had what I call my six pack. I had four dogs and two rescue cats. And they all came from difficult situations. And I thought to myself, well, I will help them, I will help them, but they helped me. They helped me. It wasn't just a one-sided relationship. They helped me learn so much, and they helped me through difficult times. They taught me so many things about companionship and friendship and they have their own internal wisdom and forgiveness. So many of them came from difficult situations that they let go of. And I thought, gosh, that's a really powerful lesson on forgiveness. So that's when I came up with dog as my doctor, cat as my nurse. And that did really well. It won a lot of awards, and I got to do a TEDx talk and lots of cool things, speaking. And then after that, I wrote 2 books that were on the power of gratitude and animals, and how animals, our pet or animal friends, can influence and nurture our own gratitude. And gratitude is such a powerful tool for, enriching your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife I have had pets when I was younger, but I've traveled too much to have them as an adult. But my wife has always had cats and dogs, and she always talks, because she went through her own traumas in life, and she always talks about how either the cat or the dog, whenever she was in those deep depression moments, would come and just put themselves on her lap or lick her hair or just be there to support her. And it's amazing that entirely different species, but still something with a soul can connect with your soul, and that's what they gravitate towards. My wife has been chronically ill for the last 9 years, and I remember when her Pomeranian was nearing the end of his life, there was a couple of times where we almost lost the dog, but because of the condition my wife was in, I know for a fact he came back and fought back for his own life to comfort her, to get her to save her life. And the connection between spirit and soul of animals and humans is amazing. And I am going to go and I'm going to find your books, and I'm going to read more than just Junkyard Girl. I'm going to read, all of them, because there is power in what you're talking about. And I can't wait to see your take on it.
Thank you. Well, and what you say is very true. That's, I always tell people, in fact, I'm helping somebody with their dog right now. And I said, look, you speak English, they speak German. They don't speak the same language. They don't know all the words. So you have to communicate with your energy. And that is kind of the crux of what you were saying. I know so much with my dog, Grace, who was instrumental in helping me also with this whole adoption and moving through the healing process. And she was going through all of her own stuff. She came from a very traumatic situation, but we helped each other. We helped our spirits heal. We helped each other on that level. And that's how powerful it is. And I always tell people, it's like, gosh, all the things I just mentioned about what animals can do, and that's just like the very, very, very tiniest tip of the iceberg. If you were to pay money for a pill that gave you all that, how much would you pay? I mean,
Right.
it's invaluable.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Dr. Vinnie Faber, she runs a horse therapy farm where people come out and connect with the animal and heal through their connection with the horse. And there was a trip I took my daughter on out to Utah. We went to go hike in Zion, and there was a place where you could go horseback riding. And I liked the place because it wasn't one of those nose to tail trips, right? Before we could even get on a horse, they made us connect with an animal that also had to connect with us. We had to get in the pen and actually be able to connect with it to a point where it would follow us without a lead. And until we could do that, we weren't able to ride it. That place wanted the connection between you and animals so that while you're out on the trail, there's a better bond and connection, and you can control the horse without having to use the restraint of the bridle and the reins. And watching people connect in that fashion was so powerful, to see that connection with spirit. So I love what you do and why you do it. So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, big advocate. So as we jump back to your surprise story. Surprise.
Any surprise?
Yeah. How did you, because I haven't gotten to the end of your book, how did you resolve that situation within yourself? And kudos to your husband for whatever he did to help you through that too, because I know when trauma happens in this house, it takes a partnership to get through it. So I
Well,
want to make sure Ken gets a thank you.
thank you. That's really awesome of you to do because in many ways, I think my life changed a lot when I met that man. I had a different opinion of men prior to that. I had I had never met somebody so kind, so authentic, so I mean, the one thing I always say when people ask me, what do you love most about Ken? And I say, so many things, but he never has tried to change me ever. He's never said, be different, act different, speak, whatever it is. It's like we both allow each other to be who we are. And I think that's a fabulous gift. So he was and has been the most amazing support. In fact, when my sister was telling me, she said the words, "you're adopted." I remember looking over at Ken, who was sitting kind of across the way, and he was shaking. I could see he had gone pale, and I could see him shaking. And I remember thinking to myself, is that what I look like? Is that what I look like? Because he looked so, and then he came over and held my hand. And, for I think a year solid, that's all we talked about. And he was just there for me all the time. So how I resolved it wasn't really said and done. It was a process. It was a process of I say it's a year because that's what it was, of me finding out about my birth mother, my half sister, talking to my 63 first cousins, or many of them. And because so many people knew, and so they were giving me pieces of the information. So I was putting together this new puzzle piece. You know how when you can get those done, or puzzles of your family, picture.
Mhm.
Now it was a whole other picture. So I was trying to put every piece together and get every piece of information I knew. And at about the 10-month mark, there was a very bad hoarding situation in northern New Mexico with dogs. And there were over 100 dogs there, and it was in the press and everything. And the woman was thrown in jail, and a bunch of us went out to take the dogs and put them in fosters and whatnot. And that's where I met Grace. And Grace none of the dogs would come to us. It was really hard. They were all very feral in some ways. Grace was the only one who came up to me, touched the back of my hand, and ran away. And I went, that dog just chose me. That was it. So I brought her home, and she was quite traumatized. She was so fearful, and a mountain lion had attacked her out there. So she still has the scars from that. So in many ways, I always think Grace lost her identity. I mean, she forgot how to be a dog. She didn't bark, she didn't sniff, she just laid there and she was kind of depressed. And I had lost my identity, so I could kind of relate. And so together we were just very patient with each other and very loving with each other. And we have formed a fabulous relationship. And everybody says she's a transformative dog. She's not at all the way she used to be, and she's very confident and she's so loyal. So I think that, I'm very fortunate in that although my family held this huge secret around me, they're also a fabulous family that is loving and supportive. And so when I felt like I was falling, they all caught me. They all came around. That's a lot of hands and a lot of bodies to catch you. And I have, since the secret was revealed, I have gotten nothing but just loving messages and calls and pictures and things just saying to me, you're our cousin, we love you. We never thought anything different of you. And I think my parents made a mistake in not telling me, but, mistakes happen in families, and we forgive and we move on. So I think to myself, ultimately, my mother, she and I went at it when I was growing up, and maybe she did some things that were not kind. I mean, she definitely did some things that were unkind, but I think to myself, in the end, she saved my life. She
Mhm.
saved me in this incredible way. Who does that? Who goes and adopts a perfect stranger when you don't even have really the means? And I believe she did the best they both did with what they had. So, and it's been a long time since they haven't been here. And I have a supportive, beautiful, wonderful husband and a fantastic life. And I have purpose. I have purpose in my life, which is to help animals and to write books about the animal human bond. So I just don't want to ever be stuck in the muck, the emotional muck. So I like to move through things as healthy and as, quickly as possible and leave that behind because life is very short.
Well, Carlene, that's a beautiful transition towards the end of this. If you were to give a piece of advice to any listener out there, and you've been an author, you've been a speaker, you've been a coach, you've been a modality healer, you've been a giver. What is the essence of the advice that you would pass on right now to someone listening, going through
About specifically,
going through something hard or traumatic in their, journey? Not everyone chooses to get through it in a productive way.
I was thinking about questions you've asked before about what is the warrior spirit? What does that mean? And
Yeah.
the things I think when I hear that, I think to myself about the hero's journey.
Hmm.
I think, the hero's journey, for anybody who doesn't know, it's kind of a way of telling a story. Almost everything you see on TV or in movies is the hero's journey. The most famous is Star Wars. Here
Hmm.
you are having a life that's normal or whatever, and something bad happens, something terrible. And either you go out for the adventure of, working through that or dealing with the demons or slaying the dragon or whatever that is, or you cave and you don't do anything. And I think to myself, all of our lives are the hero's journey. You never know. I mean, we don't get through this life without something happening that's challenging or hard or, difficult. And I think that I always look at that like, okay, in my situation, the hero's journey was discovering I wasn't who I thought I was and learning that my family was not my biological family. So either I could have not done anything and just cried for another, 6 months and not done it, or really gone forward. And I guess I encourage everyone, whatever it is, there is a gift on the other side. If we can deal with whatever it is in a very conscious way, I mean, I feel like the universe is always giving us lessons so we can become better. So it's not that there's anything wrong with us the way we are, but that we can just move a step forward. And in becoming better, in dealing with the challenges that come towards us, we grow and we also, our life gets richer, our relationships become more powerful. I mean, life becomes sweeter. So I guess I would encourage people is when the hero's journey comes, embrace it.
I love that. And I will ask you the same question I ask every one of my guests, which you just alluded to.
Oh,
What does a warrior spirit mean to Carlene?
yeah, well, for me, it's almost the thing that sparks the hero's journey. It's like that spark. It's like I think we all have it in us and in a unique way. And so my story will be different from somebody else who's going through this. But I think the warrior spirit maybe is what you're describing, your intuition, the voice, something that is so deep and that we carry with us from lifetime to lifetime.
Mhm.
It is essentially us. And so that warrior spirit, I think I reach in there all the time, and I actually speak to it every day and try and pay attention, even if it's just saying, "Don't wear that shirt, wear that other one," whatever it is. But there is so much to that. There is such a depth to that. So I guess I would say the warrior spirit to me means something that one should embrace and nurture and follow and form a relationship with, and it could lead to so many wonderful things.
I love that. And I love our time that we've spent today. I could spend hours chatting with you. So I appreciate, you coming on and sharing this. And I look forward to whatever you're going to do next. We will put some links to all your books
Thank you.
in the thing so people can enjoy the stories as well. And just thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.